The Inheritance of Loss is a novel by Kiran Desai, published in 2006. The Inheritance of Loss is a blend of historical fiction and intergenerational family drama. It is from a third-person omniscient narration. Although, the novel begins in Kalimpong, India in 1986 but covers New York City and England through flashbacks and nonlinear narration that spans the 1940s to 1980s. In this video, we will cover the historical context, detailed summary, themes and analysis, and symbolism, so do like, comment and subscribe. The plot of The Inheritance of Loss is set against the backdrop of the British Raj and the subsequent Indian independence. The British colonialized the Indian subcontinent from the 1858 to 1947. In 1947, the British partitioned the land into Pakistan and India. Jawaharlal Nehru, of the Indian National Congress, became the first Prime Minister of the independent India. Moreover, the partition and drawing of the Indian boundary, in 1947, bordered many Nepali people in Darjeeling, India, which became a source of communal unrest in that area. Subhash Ghosing demanded the establishment of a northeast state called Gorkhaland, separate from the West Bengal in India. This movement became the Gorkha National Liberation Front in 1986. It was headed by the Nepali-speaking Indians residing in West Bengal, around Darjeeling and Kalimpong. It was a violent movement that caused the deaths of over 1,200 people, including a vicious protest on July 27, 1986, a scene part of this novel. The ramifications of the British Raj could be felt decades after its end, thus, the title of the novel hints at the legacy of the loss of the Indian national identity to British colonialism. The Inheritance of Loss starts in 1986, in northeastern India near the Nepal border, with Judge Jemabai Patel and Sai, his granddaughter, sitting on the veranda of their home, Cho Oyu, while their cook prepares tea and the judge's dog, Mutt, sleeps nearby. Boys from the Gorkha National Liberation Front arrive, demanding the judge's guns, threatening them, and looting the house. The judge sends the cook to the police, but when they return, they accuse the cook of being involved in the robbery, ransacking his hut, and reading letters from Biju, his son, who is working illegally in New York. Biju struggles in New York, moving between jobs in various restaurants, and is repeatedly fired due to his undocumented status and poor conditions. The story then shifts to Sai's arrival at the judge's house 9 years earlier, after her parents died in an accident when she was 8 years old. She was raised in a convent and sent to her grandfather, where they exchanged few words, but the judge appreciated their shared cultural background of English customs. The judge recalls his journey to Cambridge at 20, shortly after marrying Nimi, his 14-year-old wife. In England, he felt isolated and alienated, growing ashamed of his skin color and accent, spending most of his time studying. The day after Sai's arrival, the cook takes her to meet her tutor, Noni, who lives with her sister Lola, and they pass the homes of other upper-class educated residents, including Uncle Patti, Father Booty, the Afghan princesses, and Mrs. Sin. Meanwhile, Biju continues to face hardships in America, struggling through jobs in Italian, Chinese, and other restaurants. Often fired for trivial reasons. Living in a Harlem basement with other undocumented immigrants, he, eventually, finds work at the Queen of Tarts bakery. Over time, the cook grows ashamed of how the judge treats him and lies about the judge's wealth and status. The judge came from a peasant caste but rose through education, attending Cambridge and joining the Indian civil service despite knowing little about India's regional languages. When Sai turns 16, Noni realizes she can no longer teach her math and science, so the judge asks the local college principal for a recommendation. Gan, a 20-year-old recent graduate who is still jobless, is hired. He and Sai quickly become captivated by each other. At the Queen of Tarts bakery, Biju meets Saeed, a Muslim from Zanzibar, and admires how Saeed faces the challenges of being an illegal immigrant, similar to Biju's struggles. Biju starts to question his biases against Pakistanis and other ethnicities, recognizing that they have never harmed him or India, unlike the white colonizers. In Kalimpong, Sai inquires about the judge's wife. Initially, the cook lies, saying they loved each other, but then recalls the judge disliked her. Sai then asks the judge about her grandmother. Though he avoids answering, he starts reflecting on himself. Before leaving for England, the judge's family, lacking funds for his travel, arranged his marriage to secure a dowry. Bomanbai Patel, a wealthy local man, offered his beautiful 14-year-old daughter, who was renamed Nimi by the judge's family. The judge and Nimi did not consummate their marriage on the night of the wedding because Nimi was worried. Before he left, the judge and Mimi shared a tender moment on a bicycle ride. The cook sends letters to Biju asking for help in getting others to America. Biju feels distressed by these requests, and Saeed, who faces the same pressures, empathizes with him. Both men are desperate for green cards and are tricked by con men who promise to get them but instead steal their money. The Queen of Tarts bakery closes shortly after. Gan and Sai's romance blossoms when he is stranded at the house during a monsoon. They flirt and play games. When Gan asks Sai for a kiss, she agrees. They visit cultural sites, the zoo, and a monastery. Gan shares his family's history of exploitation while serving in the British Army. In the interim, Lola and Noni discuss the growing political unrest among Nepalis in India, who are demanding a separate state, better job opportunities, and Nepali language schools. Noni is more sympathetic to their cause, while Lola begins to recognize her own biases when her neighbor, Mrs. Sen, expresses prejudiced views about Pakistanis. Biju is now working at Bridget's, a restaurant that serves steak, which conflicts with his values. Deciding to stay true to his principles, he quits and takes a job at the Gandhi Cafe, run by Harish Hari. Harish Hari offers staff accommodations in the basement but pays them only a quarter of minimum wage. Sai spends Christmas with Lola, Noni, Uncle Potty, and Father Booty. After New Year's, Gan encounters a GNLF procession and connects with their demands, which reflects his frustrations as a young Nepali. The next day, Gan visits Cho Ou and confronts Sai, angered by her perceived adherence to English culture. The judge recalls the deterioration of his relationship with Nini. Upon returning from England, he found that she had taken his powder puff, leading to family ridicule. When he discovered Nini had taken it, he was enraged and sexually assaulted her. In the days that followed, he forced her to speak English, discarded her traditional bangles and hair oil, and humiliated her for squatting on the toilet. He then left her behind while he went on tour. The day after Gan's outburst at Sai, he tries to apologize, but their argument about English customs continues. Sai accuses him of hypocrisy for enjoying Western things while criticizing them with his friends. Gan leaves and informs his GNLF friends about the judge's guns, describing Cho Ou and noting the lack of a telephone. Biju's first attempt at emigration involved a fraudulent cruise ship job that cost 8,000 rupees. His second attempt was a tourist visa to America, which, despite being difficult for poorer people to obtain, was eventually granted. 3 years later, while working at the Gandhi Cafe, Biju slips on spinach and asks Harish Hari for medical care. Harish Hari refuses, calling Biju ungrateful and suggesting he return to India for treatment. Father Booty, Uncle Potty, Noni, Lola, and Sai exchange library books before the GNLF barricades more roads and shops. They spot a GNLF procession, and Sai spots Gan, who ignores her. On their way back, at a checkpoint, Father Booty is stopped by the police. He was in India illegally, leading to his immediate deportation. The story jumps ahead after the GNLF boys steal the judge's guns. A few days later, the police arrest a drunk man and viciously beat him, accusing him of the crime. In America, Biju learns about the Nepali strikes and tries to call the cook, but their conversation is fragmented and leaves him feeling more desolate. The strikes continue in Kalimpong, with Nepalis setting up tents outside Lola and Noni's home. The sisters begin to feel that their wealth, which once shielded them, now puts them at risk. Sai visits Gan at his home and sees his poverty firsthand. Gan reacts angrily to her pity, and they argue before he throws her into a bush and hits her. Sai returns home to find the wife of the man beaten by the police pleading with the judge for help, but they turn her away. Gan's family learns of his involvement with the GNLF and bans him from attending the protest the next day. The cook goes to the protest, as the GNLF is forcing every family to send a male representative. The protest turns violent as rocks are thrown and police begin firing on the crowd, resulting in many young boys being killed. The protesters wriggle weapons from the police and turn them against them. The police flee to private homes, but Lola and Noni refuse them shelter. Biju decides to return to India against warnings. He buys souvenirs for his father and takes the cheapest flight to Calcutta. Upon arrival, he finds his luggage intact after a delay. Meanwhile, Kalimpong experiences more violence with numerous robberies and arson. The woman the judge had turned away returns and steals Mutt to sell her. The judge, cook, and Sai search for Mutt. At the police station, the judge is ridiculed, as this seems minor compared to the larger brutalities happening. The judge remembers when he was on tour, a woman came to Nimi's door and unknowingly took her to be part of a Nehru welcoming committee for the Indian National Congress. The judge was confronted by the district commissioner, embarrassed and lost a promotion. He returned home and violently punished Nimi, beating and throwing her out of the house. 6 months later, their daughter was born, whom he never met. It's implied that Nimi's brother-in-law arranged her death by setting her sleeve on fire while cooking. Biju learns that no buses are running to Kalimpong due to the political conditions. He hitches a ride with GNLF men, who drop him off and rob him of his money and clothing. He, then, walks to Kalimpong. Meanwhile, the judge becomes increasingly distressed over Mutt's disappearance, blaming the cook and threatening him. The cook meets Gan at the canteen who, feeling guilty, decides to find Mutt for Sai. Returning to Cho Oyu, the judge strikes the cook repeatedly with a slipper and later Sai makes the cook tea. The cook opens the banging gate to find Biju, wearing a woman's nightdress. Father and son embrace as dawn breaks over the mountains. Now we will analyze The Inheritance of Loss by Kiran Desai. The Inheritance of Loss depicts the themes of fractured identity and colonialization. The characters in The Inheritance of Loss are divided between those who embrace Western culture and those who struggle to retain their native identity in a post-colonial world. At the Gandhi Cafe, Biju and his co-workers scorn the half and half Indian students who try to sway their American friends with spicy food. Biju views Westernized Indians as imitative and betraying their culture, while the Westernized view themselves as cosmopolitan. Biju realizes that although foreign cultures and cuisines are highly valued in cities like New York, actual immigrants are still unappreciated. For instance, customers at a French bistro enjoy the food until they learn it's made by Algerians, Moroccans, and Senegalese. In India, prejudice exists against Pakistanis and black people, and Biju reflects on the irony of admiring white people despite how they arguably had done India great harm, while showing bias against others, such as Mexicans, Japanese, and Chinese, who have not harmed his country. Judge Patel, Lola, and Noni, who grew up during the British Raj and its aftermath, embrace Western culture, speaking English, watching the BBC, and collecting Jane Austen novels and paintings by Russians. They find it amusing that chicken tikka masala has replaced fish and chips as Britain's favorite takeaway meal. For the judge, however, colonization led to a deep loss of identity and self-contempt. As a young man, he studied at Cambridge to join the Indian civil service but faced alienation, with even the poorest English people looking down on him, complaining he smelled of curry. This led him to reject his Indian heritage, focusing his studies entirely on British culture. After becoming a judge in the Indian civil service, he was regarded as a man of dignity, but he began to envy the British and despise Indians. Yet, despite his efforts to assimilate, on the train back to India, he sat reading how to speak Hindustani because he was still uncomfortable with English and unfamiliar with the language spoken in the region where he would serve as a judge. After completing his education and career, and following India's independence, the judge chooses to live in isolation in a house at Kanchenjunga, built by a Scotsman. The judge could live here, in this shell, this skull, with the solace of being a foreigner in his own country, for this time he would not learn the language. His alienation from both British and Indian cultures highlights the damage colonialism has caused, even after it has ended. Like him, Sai was taught in her convent school that Indian practices were shameful. When Sai arrives at Cho Oyu, the judge immediately notices there was something familiar about her. She had the same accent and manners. She was a westernized Indian brought up by English nuns, an estranged Indian living in India. Sai, along with their upper-class neighbors, views their imported goods, like Swiss cheese, Italian opera, and Russian paintings, as expressions of sophisticated taste. However, they fail to recognize that these partialities stem from a deep-rooted cultural elitism foisted by the English. Judge Patel becomes insecure and full of self-hatred after his distressing experiences at Cambridge, where he faced humiliation. When he returns to India, unable to deal with his anger, he takes it out on his wife, Nimi, subjecting her to physical and emotional abuse to teach her the same lessons of loneliness and shame he had learned himself. When Nimi takes his powder puff, the judge is embarrassed as his family mocks him for being upset over it. After discovering Nimi took it, he hurts her. He punishes her for not knowing the English names of foods, taking them away if she can't identify them. Upon returning from a tour, the judge is informed that Nimi, unknowingly, had participated in a Nehru welcoming committee for the Indian National Congress, which opposed British colonial rule. Ashamed because he supports British colonialism, the judge abuses Nimi and sends her back to her family in disgrace. Similarly, Gan lashes out at Sai because she enjoys privileges, he doesn't. Despite his hard work and education, he cannot lift his family out of poverty. Abashed of his relationship with Sai, Gan urges the GNLF to use violence, the harshest route possible. The novel opens with GNLF boys coming to Cho Oyu to steal the judge's guns, asserting their dominance by threatening and humiliating him, Sai, and the cook. The judge realizes the boys are threatening because their insecurity drives them to assert power. After taking his guns, they force the judge to serve them like a servant and mock him, accusing him of being incapable of his own. The cook, terrified, hides under the table, begging for his life, claiming he is only a poor man. The boys finish by forcing the judge, Sai, and the cook to declare I am a fool and Jai Gorga, symbolizing their demand for a separate Gorgaland state. As the GNLF movement grows more violent, the young men leading it, long marginalized, take pleasure in making others feel powerless. Others, not directly involved in the movement, use the chaos to avenge ancient family vendettas through violence. When the cook reports the robbery to the police, they suspect him of involvement due to his low status. They reveal his poverty by searching his hut. Later, the police arrest a drunk, beating him brutally until he is blinded and his ribs are broken. During a GNLF protest to burn the Indo-Nepali Treaty of 1950, an unknown group starts throwing rocks. In the chaos, police and protesters clash violently with sticks and stones until the police open fire, killing 13 local boys. In retaliation, several police officers are killed. Desperate, the surviving officers seek refuge at Lola and Noni's house, locked out of their station by their fellow officers. Let's discuss the symbolism of the inheritance of loss by Kiran Desai. For Judge Patel, the powder puff is more than a cosmetic tool. In England, he is discriminated against because of his darker skin, and in his loneliness, he grows repulsed with his complexion, trying to lighten it with powder. Even after returning to India, he continues this practice, associating his Indian identity with shame and social rejection. The pink and white hues linked to the puff evoke the skin tones of Westerners, representing the judge's embrace of British culture and rejection of his Indian roots, both literally and figuratively. As he lightens his skin during his trials, the judge becomes furious when he can't find the puff, and his rage boils over when he discovers it tucked between his wife Nimi's breasts, leading him to beat and sexually assault her. The puff embodies his desire to be white, and its disappearance upon his return to India highlights the pointlessness of that longing. The violence surrounding the puff equals the destructive consequences of India's obsession with Anglo culture. Kukris are sickle-shaped knives traditionally used by the Gorkha. GNLF protesters, mostly farmers, carried them as scythes, symbolizing the movement's working-class origins among the poor. However, by the end of the protest, they cut their fingers with the kukris to write posters in blood, signaling their readiness for violence. As the GNLF evolved into a terrorist group, the kukri became a tool of intimidation and oppression. Do like, share and subscribe for more videos.